from people who have the same school of thought and the same ummah as yourself. I think there's unfortunately, there's I think a particular stereotype about Western women, in that, you know, people believe that because you were, not only because you were raised in the West, but you converted to Islam and you were Christian before, there's then a blanket statement that's being made with those characterizations as saying that you didn't have any values, you didn't have any morals before, therefore you must have been doing X, Y, Z before you converted to Islam. And I tell people, like, you know, the reason why I became Muslim is because my parents raised me with particular standards and particular morals. So you shouldn't assume that because somebody wasn't Muslim that they had carte blanche to do whatever they want before, that, you know, Christians don't have any morals or they don't have any values at all. So this perception about women from the West, it reminds me of the perception or the way women were treated during the slavery times of the African slave trade, where the slave master would have his housewife, literally she was the woman of the house, the one he had kids with, and then he had his fun, let's say, with the African slave women. There's this perception that the other women are used for all our sexual desires, and these women are pure, and these are the women you have children with, and these are your public women. And I feel like this mentality, you know, and I'm not making a general statement about everyone, but it does exist, where it's like you can have fun with a Western woman, but when you want to settle down and get married, then you have to marry cousin, you know, or friend or neighbor from back home. And it's even to the point where you will hear this from Muslim women towards other women, where they'll, you know, give their son who's gone overseas, meaning come to the West to get his education, and they know he's going to be there for several years, and they'll say, it's okay, do what you want, you're a man with, you know, the Western woman, but understand after your studies are finished, then you come back home or whatever and you settle down. This in and of itself does two things. You have men who will do this, and it's not to, you know, put a stab into our Muslim men, but how we think as a community, not only towards to women who've converted to Islam, but how you treat other women who are not Muslim. So if this is your perception, how you define those women, and you think that you can, you know, use them and abuse them in this way, and it's justifiable, you have to understand that you're also making a statement against Islam when you treat people of other faiths like this. So you might be just doing something because you have your own needs, but we also have to understand what the repercussions are to behaving like this and treating other people like this. So this is a problem. Racism, yeah. There's the ideal, which is the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, and of course Allah, and then there's the practical side. Racism, unfortunately, is extremely present in our community, our communities, and it's not just one against the other, or one above the other. It's ever present in all of them, and I think one of the unfortunate personalities or characteristics that we have is that the belief that white women or fair women, fair-complected women, are of a superior quality than anyone who's brown skin or tanned or dark skin. This is just, you know, in the marriage selection base. So I've seen this, I know this exists in the Lebanese community, it is there in the Iranian community, it even is there in the Indian and the Pakistani community, and we were just talking, it was there in the Afghani community. It exists within African culture. It's something that you will see as a residue to colonialism, the state of mind that white is better or has better or higher value. So I say to myself, so if you don't fall into that grouping or that category as a woman, first of all, you know, that treatment or that subtle notion from families or from men towards women, that these women are of a higher value, or those are the ones, the prize women that you want to get. All those women who don't fall into that category, what are you saying to them, and what are you doing to them emotionally and mentally and spiritually? And then what are their chances of getting married if this is their perception? These women are better. So anything with a little bit of color to anyone who's dark, like, we don't want you. Or you're not eligible for marriage because you're not white, you don't have green eyes, you don't have blue eyes, and you don't look like this. What are we doing to each other? What are we saying to each other? And then we talk about Prophet Muhammad, and he's amazing, and he's so this, and then and Imam Ali, and mashallah, mashallah, and all this, garbage, because we don't really believe that. We don't really believe that. We put all these cultural barriers and all these individualistic perspectives in the forefront, and then we talk so highly about our imams in the Quran. And it's like, so what does all of that mean to you if, in essence, this is what you actually value? Alhamdulillah, I've had chance. Allah has blessed me in that way. Allah has allowed me to complete all of my wajibat, at least what I call. I know what is actually wajib is to go and do Hajj. But He's allowed me, for myself, I consider to have done ziyarah of all of the imams, all of the Ahlul Bayt. I feel that is something that takes precedence and is a priority, as opposed to doing, personal vacations. So I have had the opportunity to go to Syria, to Iraq, to Lebanon, and to Iran, and to obviously to Arabia, and to do all my ziyarah. So I've given my salutations personally to all of my imams. Inshallah, they accept. Alhamdulillah. Two of my favorite hadith are two, I think, hadith that make me reflect a lot and to see how applicable they are to today. One of them was from Prophet Muhammad, where he said that, he said, I fear the treatment of women and children. Sorry, he said, I fear your treatment of women and children after my demise. So when I read that, I was like, wow, that's so applicable to what's happening to today. Not only to the universal situation of domestic violence and abuse that women in general are suffering, but within the Muslim community, the amount of domestic violence that happens is still pretty silent and quiet. And when I spoke to two sheikhs about this, the validity of this hadith, they both said, we're not sure about the chain of narration, but if in fact it is true, you have to look at who it was that the Prophet was addressing. So one sheikh said to me, look and see, Fatima, who he's talking to. He's not talking to Jewish men, and he's not talking to Christian men. If in fact the Prophet did say this, he was making this address to Muslim men. He says, so what does that say about what he was seeing about the future of how Muslim men would be treating women and children? And we're seeing this today. So this is the new age of Jahiliyyah. We've come in full circle. From before the time of the Prophet, Islam's been introduced, and it's like we've gone back into treating the women and children in this manner, the way they were being treated before. The other hadith that resonates with me a lot is the one from Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam, where she says that for those of you who consider yourselves to be our followers, make sure that you don't embarrass us. Wow. Wow. I don't know if I really need to say much more. I mean, when we look around at what's happening in our communities, I think often about how I speak to my son at times, and I'll tell him, when you go outside, people know who I am, so make sure you don't embarrass me. And here she is putting forward this statement towards the entire ummah and saying, don't embarrass us. And I think we're doing everything contrary to what she's asked of us. Unfortunately, I don't think we're elevating the status in the name of the Ahlul Bayt as she's asked us to do. I don't really remember my first Muharram. So it's difficult for me to answer how my first Muharram was. I think I did maybe some research about Karbala, and there wasn't anything that really stands out to me as, this was totally weird, or this was off, or this was really bad. It wasn't as though I went into a center and they were beating themselves with, or cutting themselves with knives or doing anything like that. So there wasn't anything extraordinary. It was just, I know it was the time for mourning. We went, and at that time we didn't really have so many English lecturers, so you went into the masjid to be there with the community for this time. Usually what I would do was I would bring in one of my English books, and while the majlis was going on, I would just sit and read, and then people would be crying around me, and I didn't really understand. I couldn't connect with why they were being so emotional. So that took a long time before that was able to come about. And the first person who was actually able to incite some emotion into me was Brother Hassanin Rajabali. So, alhamdulillah, I'm glad it's changed a lot now, that there's a lot of English speakers out there giving the majlis, in the language that I can relate to and all the youth can relate to as well. But at that time, it was difficult. It was just, didn't understand the language, didn't understand what was going on, and just couldn't relate to why everybody was so sad. Some of the lessons from Karbala, I think for myself, there's really, I think, one primary lesson. I think it's how Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his treatment of people. From the time he leaves Medina, when he goes to Mecca, and then on his way from Mecca to Karbala, I think what impressed me the most is that that concrete love for humanity. And even though he recognizes that, another human being is his arch enemy, the amount of love and compassion that he will exhibit to that person up until the very end, where that person has made it clear that they absolutely refuse to accept his position, who he is, and to humble themselves before the Imam, where he has to get to the point where he has to actually bring out physical force. It is very extremely profound, because from the point where he meets Hur, and he agrees to, he tells all of his companions, make sure you water all of their horses first, let them water first, and then you water ours. And then, who does that? You can't even barely get a glass of water from your neighbor. That treatment, the respect for the land, the respect for the animals, the respect for the human beings. I mean, the eloquence with which he spoke towards his enemies, how he spoke to Omar ibn Saad, and he kept trying to remind them and make them think and make them ponder, and just like, don't you know who I am? Essentially, do you realize what you're doing? The compassion, the mercy, the rahmah that the Imam, shows to everybody. If we all of us could have just like an ounce of that, towards each other, it would be such a difference. If we're doing a good enough job spreading the message of the Ahlul Bayt, I think we can always do more. There's a hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam where he says, work, work, and work. So you should never think you've done enough. And even when you've completed one job, you should be already in preparation for starting the next job, and not think like, okay, I've done my duty, I'm finished. I have a different perspective about how we bring forward the Ahlul Bayt to the general society. For whatever reason, it's good, it's very positive that the community or the Ummah feels a sense of revitalization during Muharram and wants to talk about Islam and talk about Imam Hussein and his sacrifice and share this with other people. But it's pretty much relegated to Muharram. And for myself, if I'm going to speak about my religion, I would prefer to start with Allah and the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. Whereas a lot of people feel that they want to introduce Islam to other people, starting with Imam Hussein. And I'm not going to negate that or think that there's something wrong, but I just have my direction would be a little bit different. In addition,